July 2012. Inspector Michel Gavreau is climbing up a towering stack of massive metal barrels inside a rented warehouse in Quebec. Now, he expects every single one of these barrels to weigh nearly 600 pounds. I mean, these aren't just any barrels. They hold the province's strategic maple syrup reserve. The sheer density of that liquid, it should make these stacks virtually immovable, like climbing a solid concrete wall.
But as Gavreau steps onto one near the very top, it just shifts instantly, right beneath his boot. There is literally zero resistance. He actually nearly plummets to the floor. The barrel is completely empty, and, well, as a wider inspection would soon reveal, this wasn't some isolated little accounting mistake. Thousands of barrels had been systematically drained right under their noses. Nearly 3,000 tons of syrup worth 18.7 million Canadian dollars had just vanished into thin air.
Okay, let's dive into this. To understand how on earth $18 million of syrup just goes missing, you really have to look at who controls it in the first place. Quebec doesn't just make most of Canada's maple syrup. Depending on the year, they produce the vast majority of the entire world's supply. When you think of maple syrup, you probably picture a pretty standard agricultural crop, right? Small family farms tapping trees in the snow, that whole charming vibe. But the reality is completely different. The Federation of Quebec Maple Syrup Producers actually operates far less like a traditional farmers' co-op and a lot more like an oil cartel, artificially controlling a highly liquid asset. Sap flow relies on a super-specific, incredibly narrow weather pattern, basically freezing nights and warm days. So production can violently swing up or down depending on the climate. To stop those swings from totally crashing the market, they had to create a massive buffer.
That buffer is known as the International Strategic Reserve. It's a system designed to store surplus barrels from the really strong harvest years, and then they deliberately release them when production is poor. It stabilizes the global supply, sets a firm floor for prices, and because syrup can sit perfectly usable for years in sealed drums, this warehouse we're talking about isn't just an agricultural silo. It's essentially a bank vault holding tens of millions of dollars in highly liquid, easily tradable assets.
But anytime you strictly control the market, you're going to create friction. The reality on the ground was intense. The Federation enforced strict quotas, set fixed prices, mandated heavy inspections. And while supporters argue this saved thousands of small farms from destructive price swings, critics absolutely saw it as a cartel. They deeply resented the fines and the harsh restrictions on private sales, and that tension, it birthed a shadow market, an underground network where unregulated syrup could be moved and sold under the table. And unlike stolen diamonds or cash with serial numbers, stolen syrup is completely untraceable the exact second you pour it into another container.
Now, what's really interesting here is the location itself, Saint-Louis-de-Blandford. After a massive bumper crop in 2011, the Federation desperately needed temporary storage space. They just had too much of the stuff. So they rented a warehouse right here, southeast of Troisrivieres. They placed tens of millions of dollars of liquid gold in a facility that was, to put it incredibly mildly, severely underprotected.
Honestly, the facility was shockingly vulnerable. We're talking no comprehensive camera systems, no alarm systems, very infrequent physical checks, and the most fatal flaw of the whole shebang, insider access. A guy named Avik Karen, whose wife actually owned the facility, realized just how easy a target this was. He teamed up with an organizer named Richard Volliers, and together with this tight-knit network of relatives, drivers, and syrup dealers, they took full advantage of the sheer banality of leaving a massive fortune just sitting unguarded in the dark.
Let's look at how this builds, because the heist itself was audaciously simple. Step 1. They drove trucks loaded with empty barrels right into the warehouse. Step 2. Remove the full barrels. Step 3. Take those full barrels to a remote sugar shack, drain out the insanely valuable syrup, and refill some of the drums with plain old water. Step 4. Return the water-filled barrels back to the warehouse, making absolutely sure the giant stacks looked completely untouched from the floor. Eventually, they got so confident they didn't even bother with the water part. They just drained them and left them sitting there completely empty.
Which brings up a massive, glaring logistical problem. Where does $18.7 million in stolen syrup actually go? Think about it. How do you fence 3,000 tons of sticky, heavy evidence across provincial and international lines without getting caught?
So the crucial point is how this evidence literally vanished. The thieves moved it out through New Brunswick and into commercial networks, reaching deep into the United States. It was sold off in smaller batches to distributors who, of course, claimed total ignorance. And here is the truly wild part. You might have actually eaten the evidence. No joke. Once it entered the open market, it was blended, repackaged, and consumed. Millions of dollars of a strict strategic reserve simply disappeared into the global food chain as ordinary pancakes, confectionery, and processed food.
But back in that warehouse, the illusion had shattered. Once Inspector Gavreau found that featherlight barrel in July 2012, the Quebec Provincial Police launched Operation Siropro. They aggressively traced transport records, financial payments, warehouse movements. By December 2012, mass arrests were made and hundreds of barrels were seized. But the legal fallout? That dragged on for a full decade. It wasn't actually until 2022 that the Supreme Court of Canada restored a forfeiture order demanding over $9 million from the ringleader. They ruled that he had to pay back the gross value of the illegal proceeds, not just his net profit after expenses.
That ringleader, Richard Vallières, was handed an 8-year prison sentence for theft, fraud, and trafficking stolen goods. The insider, Ava Caron, along with several others, also faced serious prison time, probation, and heavy financial penalties. The entire scheme relied on the perfect camouflage. 9,000 similar-looking drums created the illusion that nothing had changed. The very system built to create perfect, untouched stability, an environment where barrels were supposed to sit unopened and entirely ignored for years just to protect the market, provided the exact conditions needed to make an $18 million fortune vanish, one barrel at a time, until a single inspector climbed to the top and felt nothing beneath his feet.